What's going on, everyone?
Hello.
Welcome to Playback Appeal. We are the Rap Geeks. My name is Sean,
And it's Lizzie today.
and today we're discussing Big L's final studio album, second studio album, released July 11th, 2000, approximately 20 years from today. And it's
Right.
called The Big Picture.
And
Now,
posthumous, huh? Is that how you pronounce
yep,
that? Post
posthumously,
posthumous
posthumously,
album, speaking of.
posthumous. I'm gonna say posthumous. That sounds a little cooler. But
Okay.
I thought it was very fitting for us to discuss this album, The Big Picture by Big L. Um, as some of you may know who Big L is, Big L was a rapper from Harlem, New York. Always repped where he's from, 139 in Lenox. And he was very well known for his freestyle ability, very popular among the underground hip hop community. He only released one album in 1995 called Lifestyles of the Poor and Dangerous. And unfortunately, on February 15, 1999, Lamont Coleman, or Big L, was shot 9 times in East Harlem, New York, in his hometown, right outside the same area that he was rapping for a very long time. And it's very tragic. And so I think it was very fitting to talk about this because another New York rapper recently suffered a very similar fate. Recently had his debut album released posthumously, and that is none other than Pop Smoke. So, in many ways, we can even make the reference that Big L was the Pop Smoke of his generation in terms of a big New York rapper coming on the scene and unfortunately passing away after very little music available to listen to on his catalog. But today we're reviewing the album that came out after he passed away about over a year later, and we're giving it a listen. Now, to give you guys a real honest opinion, I never wanted to listen to this, mainly
What?
because the first album, Lifestyles of the Poor and Dangerous, that was released 5 years prior to this, is to date one of my favorite hip hop albums and an album that really introduced me to, I would say, more hardcore hip hop and especially New York hardcore hip hop in the 90s. And I agree with a lot of rappers like Mac Miller, like Logic, that go back and say that Big L is arguably the GOAT of hip hop. And I'm not saying that he is the GOAT, but in terms of his freestyle ability and in terms of what he brought to the table and exceptional skill and craftsmanship, um, he was the predecessor to an Eminem. He was the predecessor to a Jay-Z. And who would have known how big and successful he would have been if he had still had the opportunity to release more than one album. So the big picture, the second and final studio album of Big L, was a very incomplete album, and it was pretty much taken by Flamboyant Records, and I believe it was Rich King, who was his manager at the time, just trying to get as many features in as possible and produce this as quickly as possible with whatever was left in Big L's in his catalog. So, but regardless, it's been certified gold by the RIAA, which meant that it still was able to sell. And we're gonna dive in today about our personal thoughts on this record. So, um, I guess my first question to you, Lizzie, is: have you even heard Big L's first album, his first and only album that was released during his lifetime?
I think when you first um told me what your thoughts were on Big L, we had a conversation probably back in 2018, man. I would think it might have been 2018, and we ended up talking about Big L for whatever reason, and that must have been the first time I ever really dove into the catalog, and I usually start from the bottom up, and so I know that I listened to it then, and at that point I was fully convinced that Big L was one of my favorite. Like when I say one of my favorite rappers, I'm really meaning like rapping.
A
Like
rapper's rapper.
yeah, like cuz my introduction to rap was battle rap, and
Mhm.
this cat mean. I listen to his his freestyle with Jay-Z that we listened to before the pod, right? What show is that? Stretch and Bobbito. Um, I listened to that freestyle over and over again, and many of his other live raps, and he's just my favorite rapper. And I feel like he's everybody's favorite rapper. One of those kind of cats.
Mhm.
Obviously, like I would even think, even if he was still alive, would be still underground. But all of the biggest pop stars, he would be their favorite, like as far as a rap career goes. And so, as far as the first album goes, I know I heard it, but I haven't gone back to it ever since. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, I do remember liking it more than this one though, to be honest.
Right, and that's why I've always heard bits and pieces of this album, the big picture, but I never wanted to sit through the whole thing, and it's because of what kind of happened to me as I've gone through this album and re-listened to it because I've listened to Lifestyles of the Poor and Dangerous way too many times. Like I know those bars, I know those lines by heart, and what I was always afraid of coming into this album was that it wouldn't match the expectations of his first album, and that was a weird thing because I know for a fact that people like this album, but it's hard, man, because it's so incomplete.
This one,
I'm not
it felt
saying it's
incomplete.
if it is incomplete. It's not just it felt incomplete. Just you can tell this is a compilation. This is a compilation of different tracks, maybe some B-sides, some freestyles, and you can even tell that the recording quality of these songs varies. So sometimes you hear Big Al and it sounds like he's literally rapping over like a boom mic. And
Yeah,
then in other times he's rapping in a professional studio. And with these features, um, you know, they threw in Tupac. They threw in Cool G Rap. They threw in Big Daddy Kane, Guru, Remy Ma, Fat Joe. They
yeah,
did throw in some interesting people. And they also had a good amount of good producers as well, like Lord Finesse, DJ Premier,
yeah.
Pete Rock.
Can we talk
Um,
about the Tupac feature though? Be-
yeah, so it's a weird one, man, because it is the name that stands out the most when you look at the features because it's just like, what the hell, Tupac? So it is a weird thing where they put two dead rappers on a track together.
yeah,
One of West Coast's most prominent dead rappers and East Coast most prominent dead rappers, and just try to make it fit together over a New York style production. And you know what? It's a good track. It's definitely a good track, but I don't think it really showcased either of them in their prime.
yeah. With anything that's posthumous, right? Like it's for me, I try to check for what parts of this work was planned by the original artist and which was who and what parts were decided by somebody else. And in some of these features, I can't tell how many of them were premeditated or if it happened just to get a record finished, and you needed some artists to just fill in you need another verse because back then you needed at least maybe three verses, and so okay, we need to throw some other verses in here. We don't have any more from L, so what I mean, let's throw somebody else on here. That's the kind of stuff that I think about coming into the album. I did feel a lot of it. A handful of at least my favorite joints did feel like they happened after his death, which is fine. I mean, I like the Fat Joe joint as well, in addition to the Tupac joint. But what one thing that was weird about the Tupac joint was it felt like it happened after the fact. Like you kind of said, they kind of just put two voices together. The idea of it is great, but for some reason I feel like the execution just it didn't hit.
Yeah, I can understand where you're coming from, and as far as like the selection of who they chose to be on this record, right? We know that Big L was part of the Digging in the Crates crew, DITC, and Fat Joe began his career right there in DITC, And so DITC was made up of guys like OC, Lord Finesse, Big L, Fat Joe. So it worked out to have Fat Joe, but if you look at the features on the first album, you know, it was guys like Kid Capri. It was guys like Jay-Z. And so it had a little bit more of that New York raunchiness to it, that 90s raunchiness. And you know what, one of my favorite features on the album was Guru. And as you know, Gangstar, one of their most famous songs, starts off with Rest in Peace Big L. So I thought that was very, very fitting to have Guru on the album. But but it is kind of weird to put in Big Daddy Kane and put in Cool G Rap and put in Tupac out of all people into the
Yeah.
album. I'm not hating on it, but I'm just saying for the big difference between that first album and this second album is really the coherence. Because in the first album, there's a theme, and the theme is this is Harlem, this is killing, this is drug deals, and it was a dark album, very very dark album where Big L is trying to process his thoughts of growing up, and maybe even in some ways is similar to Biggie Smalls in that he's contemplating suicide, that he's thinking about how his life is going to end and how he's willing to kill people in order to survive in these streets. Whereas the big picture was maybe the they were trying to make Big L more of a Jay-Z, and Jay-Z was his protege. And as you might know, the first track Jay-Z ever rapped on was a Big L track. So in that regards, I think they were trying to push this album to a more mainstream narrative and be able to sell more copies. But at the end of the day, it didn't achieve really what Big L was all about, which is this very grimy, gritty, guttery New York 90s Harlem, hard as fuck, hardcore type of hip hop. And I think I'm not gonna say it's a bust, but it didn't reach expectations.
I feel you on that 100%. But that is the challenge of a posthumous album, is trying to match the taste level of the original artist. Like, one, you can never guess what direction they might have wanted to attempt to take themselves in their career. Maybe they wanted to make the same music that they started, that got them famous, or they might have wanted to try something different, you know. And with this one, man, I really think it was a lot of corporate decisions. Might have been more corporate decisions than from the actual talent. Do you get that feeling at all from it?
Um,
Because in the beginning, in the first song, I
yeah,
don't know
yeah,
if they threw real shade at LL Cool J. I mean, I
right.
I get, if you listen to the intro, they tell everybody throw their L's up, and then the MC is talking about how, no, not for lazy, not for LL Cool J, none of that stuff. You know what I mean? And I don't know if that was actual shade, because Big L is an underground artist, whereas LL is the exact opposite of that, right? Big old rap pop star. And so if if the decisions were made from corporate, it would tend to lean more pop, and that's what I feel like from this album, as far as the choices of the songs and the features. Maybe that's kind of what I get
Yeah,
from it.
yeah, and I understand where you're coming from. I think at the time, first of all, talking about LL Cool J specifically, like we all know LL Cool J's debut album Radio in 1985 is still it is like one of the most influential pieces of music ever recorded in terms of its prominence and what it brought to hip hop. The first really major hip hop release ever with like ghetto blasters. And so I think that New York rappers, when they talk about LL, they understand that. But I do think at that time with LL Cool J, you know, I don't think it was a direct jab at LL. I don't even think LL Cool J even knew who Big L was. It was more of a and although you say Big L is an underground rapper, I don't think that's the appropriate way to put it because
Hmm.
I think he was in the same limelight as a Nas. I think he was in the same
Sure.
limelight as a Wu Tang Clan. I think
Agree.
he was the same
Right.
limelight as just whatever was coming out
But
of
those
New
are
York at the time.
those are counter culture groups, right? Nas being the counter of thought, I guess you could say, right?
Mhm.
Wu Tang, obviously, just wild
You know,
ass cats.
do you call Gangstar underground? You know, that would really be the question here.
Yeah, and my I think my answer to that is highly subjective on just my generation of music. I think
Okay.
you could look at a Gangstar style breeding what is currently the underground scene. You know what I mean? That's kind of that's and so that. But I think at the time, I think it was just straight up hip hop. There wasn't a real differentiation between underground and regular, right? Or maybe
Yeah,
because I mean, yeah, people like LL and Big L existed at the same time, right?
right.
So there was a counter scene and the mainstream scene still.
And also, do you consider Reasonable Doubt, which was Jay-Z's first album, which if you if you listen to Big L and you listen to Jay-Z his first album, it's immediately noticeable off the bat that Jay-Z was highly influenced by Big L. Just the way that he delivered the flow and was able to, I'm not going to try rapping it, but it
Mhm.
but it but
Yeah,
it
yeah,
like
no, I'm with you.
he would go into triplet flows. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Big L would go into triplet flows. And so did Jay, and it was to increase the speed at the rate of their delivery of rhymes. And then another thing is Big L is a punchline artist, bro. Like he's able to deliver a punchline harder than most rappers are able to, and his freestyle ability in terms of what he's able to get out is better than most rappers' penmanship.
absolutely, absolutely, man. I look forward to the punchline every single time. When you grow up battle rapping, you pretty much try to guess the person's next line or what he's gonna rhyme with, and that's probably one of the most engaging things about hip hop, and that's what I get out of listening to Big L. I'm really listening to what he might say next or where he's taking this part of the verse, lyrically, and I love listening to him because of that.
Mm. Where do you think he stands? Because I've tried to process this as a hip hop fan as always like, well, he's not ever going to get recognition with the likes of Biggie, Pac, Nas, you know, maybe even ODB. And I'm trying to understand where does he like if where is he on Mount Rushmore's, man? Because for me, as a pure rapper, as a pure rapper, he's maybe the greatest. But I'm not saying musically he's the greatest. I'm not saying lyrically he's the greatest. All but I'm saying what does it mean to be a rapper? I think to me it means to be a poet and a storyteller. And no one to me has done a better job of conveying of chill like spine chilling ability to be able to show stories. And I'll give you an example. Like on the song that he did on this whole record,
The
which was
heist,
called I gotta pull up the track list.
the
It
heist.
was called no, not the
Oh,
heist. It was
okay.
Casualties of a Dice Game.
Mm.
And if you listen to Casualties of a Dice Game, he's literally talking about how he played a dice game and then he lost. So he shot the other guy, took the 50 grand, but then he was getting shot at by police. And then he ran through the corner and so he didn't know what to do with this money because he was going to get caught. So he threw it in the air, had all the kids grab the money, and then he bled to death. It's like that ability to show imagery is something that is to be able to tell a story from beginning to end is something that is really criminally underrated in modern hip hop. To be able to use a 3 minute song to tell a story, and Big L is one of the best of them. I also think of Cannabis as another one that's able to just be a straight up storyteller. So when I ask you, like, where do you think Big L ranks in terms of the greatest goats of hip hop? Like, is it fair to say that he might be the greatest in terms of just pure rapping ability?
Hip hop as an idea is multi-dimensional. Um currently it is a lucrative business now.
Right.
And some rappers, and so as these expertise within this thing of hip hop starts to expand, sometimes now we have to judge people on multiple dimensions: their business at acumen, lyrical flow, right? A&Ring, right? A lot of
Hmm.
rappers are good A&Rs. I think Currency is a great A&R, but not as good as a rapper, right? Wonderful beat choices and collaborations with producers and other artists. And so people like, I guess you could say somebody like Drake is really good at that. They're good at catching the waves. Is like pretty much as soon as they start to bubble, hopping on that and hopping out. And I guess you can call that great marketing. There's a marketing aspect to it as well. Now, at least if we're judging Big L as a rapper in the '90s, all you had to worry about was your personality, lyrical content, um,
Staying alive.
that part. You know what I mean? So it's like it, and that was a challenge as well, obviously, right?
Yeah.
And if we're judging him on the '90s standard of what it actually is required of a rapper, he is he has a dollar. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He has his own dollar. Not just on the Mount Rushmore. He is a fabric, of the lifestyle of a rapper and qualities. Um, So yeah, but today, I mean, it's not enough to be just that.
Right.
Apparently, it's apparently not enough because what did Kendrick say, right? Killer Mike could
Yeah.
be platinum. Um,
Right.
and so it takes so much more. But maybe that's just because of how hip hop is today, as it being pop. So when anything goes up into the mainstream, it's more about pleasures, right? It's more about happy feelings. Hold up. Excusez-moi. But yeah, back then when you did hip hop like this, you had to really be about the words you were saying, and people cared about that. Probably that might have been number one.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And I think at the time, there wasn't so much emphasis on the producer back then. I mean, he got as good as you can get. Like he got Pete Rock, he got DJ Premier. Um, but now there's so much more emphasis on the producer than there was at that time. That production value has increased tremendously, which makes music more listenable, especially in hip hop. Whereas back then, it was totally okay to literally loop a 20-second bar over and over and over again
Yeah, and
for the whole entire track.
That works sometimes. That works sometimes. I think of feeling it. You could loop that over and over again. I mean, I can mess with it. That freestyle on with Big L and Jay Z. That you could loop that over and over again. Uh, but it's people like Big L that can rock just that because of the words is the only is they're just too good. They're nice with the words, man. And the punchlines.
Yeah, agreed with that one.
So, since you introduced me to Big L, like in a real way, like we all knew about Big L because I grew up playing Tony Hawk, and so we know who Gangstar is.
Yeah,
And obviously the intro to the song, Big L, rest in peace, Bum, right? And so we always hear about Big L, but I literally was 20 something, right, when I first listened to Big L. But you said that was one of your first introductions to, what did you call it? Kind of hip hop, like did you call it underground or
no, I
dangerous
I
or
call it like hardcore.
hardcore hip hop, right?
Hardcore, because hardcore to me is like when people say what is hardcore hip hop, right? Because it is up for debate, but to me, hardcore hip hop is violent hip hop,
Right, right.
and I think Big L's lyrics prove that
And
he's rapping about some shit.
And when was that in the time frame? Like did you listen to that before you heard a Tribe, or did you hear a Tribe first and then ran into Big L?
Yeah, I would say I heard Tribe first
Okay.
because Tribe was one of my first, like to me, my first introductions to hip hop. Very first ones are Public Enemy and Run DMC because I was really into rock music. I wasn't so into hip hop. Then it went to A Tribe Called Quest, and it went to probably Kanye West. His first three albums, I would say, or first two, really. Um, and then from there, it kind of span into Wu Tang Clan and Big L, and specifically just like '90s New York hip hop was what I was into. Because keep in mind, this was like the late 2000s, so at that time it was all about T Pain and Flow Rida. So like I was not messing with like whatever hip hop was coming out at that time. So I was more interested in like seeing that core, like, I was a fan of rock music and punk rock. So I was looking for something that was a little bit more uh not so polished. And I think for me, Big L showed me at a young age just how brilliant you can be as a rapper, how brilliant you can be lyrically, and how rap music really, at its essence, is storytelling.
Now, when you're coming from rock music into hip hop and you listen to somebody like a Big L. Oh, but you were already kind of established your hip hop sound by the time you got to Big L, right? Like your
Well,
taste, your flavor?
I mean, established in terms of like shit, man. Like Deltron 3030 was on my radar,
Okay.
if that's what you
Yeah.
mean.
Well, cuz I'm wondering because just the amount of lyrics in one song in a hip hop song versus a rock song is it's so much more words, and I'm wondering if you even care about lyrics when you're coming into hip hop from rock.
Right. So Big L was the first time that I started to care about lyrics because he
Right.
was so
You got to.
it's impossible not to listen to him, and he forces you to make the lyrics the primary part of his music. Like
Yeah.
it, more than anything.
Is there anything that Big L can do storytelling wise that like man, I'm blanking out on his name. Rick Slick Rick? Who do you think is in the they're both on are they on the top 5 of storytelling for you? Slick Rick and Big L? Maybe
Hmm.
with some would say Tupac. Um
I think
Storytelling and
Tupac is
poetry.
incredible, man, in terms of a storyteller.
Yeah, and I mean Kendrick.
Um and Slick Rick is maybe one of the first to really make storytelling
Yeah.
a big part of the music.
But
I
there
mean,
wasn't anything dangerous, I guess you could say. He did talk about stuff that happens in the streets, but he did it set in as a satire, I guess. In his
no, but he has, but it was taken to the next level with a guy like Eminem,
okay,
right? With a guy like in terms of the darkness of storytelling. But I mean, yeah, Slick Rick is maybe the greatest storyteller of all time. Like I will agree with you on that. And then after that, you got to give it to the East Coast cats. You got to give it to Chef Raekwon, Ghostface Killer, Nas, Biggie, Big L, and then after that, we can agree that maybe someone like a Kendrick Lamar and a Lupe Fiasco are also tremendous storytellers as well. But that's a lost art. That's what I'm saying. Is
yeah,
that it's a very lost art because no one really cares to continue doing that anymore.
yeah. I'm really wondering if it really is a lost art, like, or if or if those songs just aren't hitting for whatever reason. I mean, right now I think we're back to a I think right now we're kind of back to a Soldier Boy era lyrically in hip hop. We all need some
Yeah.
sort of dances attached to the majority of music that's happening right now, thanks to social platforms, and that's fine. Um, but eh, telling a whole story, you know, I, that's what I'm saying. It's like I think people are doing it, but they're not going beyond. There's no reason for people to share the music. If you've heard that track with Kendrick and Lil Wayne on
Mhm.
was that Lil Wayne's last album? That whole story they were talking about having a girl set they have a hoe that they're setting somebody else up and they want to rob him and I maybe kill him. I don't remember, but you remember that song? It was on Wayne's last album and they went
Yeah. No,
pretty in depth. and
Yeah, maybe,
and that
maybe.
opened my ears to. I mean, Wayne he's nice with with some storytelling too. You know,
But it's not gonna consume the entire song.
right, right. And but those aren't his hits. And so they're definitely still out there. I think the challenge for people who are making music that are telling stories in it, for music to kind of to expand is for it to be shared. But it's that's hard. How do you make it share? How do you make a song that's shareable? Um, so I don't
Yeah.
think it'll ever.
No, no, I think that part of hip hop is put to rest. Jay-Z might have been the final one. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just not valued anymore.
Yeah. I mean, they are telling
But
about their
yeah,
life. A lot of these
yeah,
rappers now have a much more luxurious life than rappers did back then. And so they got a lot more
correct.
personal things to talk about now. Like
Yeah,
there's no reason to talk about what's happening in the hood anymore for a lot of these more successful rappers
right.
because they're not in there anymore. And so I think we won't find that. We'll only find that for the new and upcoming rappers. But even they are under the pressure of, oh, I got to make a hit. So none of that shit's going to go, you know?
Yeah, that makes me feel like thinking about that, like when did that transition happen where rappers stopped talking about the streets and they started talking about the bling? Like the first one that comes to mind is the song "My Adidas" by Run DMC. Was the first time I think anyone ever talked about clothes and
Mm,
and how fly they were.
right.
But when did that happen? When did that transition happen from I'm robbing and I'm killing and I'm selling drugs to I'm driving a Bugatti and I'm
Yeah. Well,
rocking some chains?
it was when recording music, the access to recording music came to the suburbs. And so the majority of people making rap music didn't live the lifestyle of their favorite rappers. And so I think that makes perfect sense, right? Like cuz back when Big L was rapping, it wasn't looked highly upon being to be a rapper. You know what I mean? So I think yeah, when hip hop got suburban, people weren't talking about doing a heist or anything like that. So
Yeah,
that's what I think it changed up.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I would agree with you on that one. Um, but yeah, those are my thoughts on Big L's The Big Picture, and pretty much my stance on it is you don't have to listen to it. Um, as a hip hop fan, I don't think it's essential listening. I think his first album, "Lifestyles of the Poor and Dangerous," is top 10 essential listening for anyone interested in going back to that era of hip hop, 90s hip hop. And if you've never, even as a good introduction to that era of 90s hip hop, or anyone that's interested in lyrical hip hop, I think that's essential listening. But is The Big Picture essential listening? I'm not going to say it is. Um, because, but with that being said, it's nice to have in your arsenal of music to listen to. And and so therefore, can I recommend this? Does this have playback appeal? I'm gonna give that one a yes and a no, and that's very dependent on, well, how deep do you want to go in the crates? If you're real deep on the crates and you want to hear what Big L had to offer, maybe what some of the tracks that were left over, and you just want that nostalgia of hearing a Big L album, by all means, go listen to it. But there's better stuff out there. There maybe isn't a better rapper than Big L, but there's better stuff out there to listen to in general if that's what you're really craving for. So what is your take?
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend going to Big Picture if this is your first time hopping to Big L. I say do it the right way, listen to the first one, and then expand from there. Go to the Big Picture if you need a little bit more context of his life and his legacy. I think this album wanted to highlight his legacy and put some OG rap cats in there as well. I think that was another reason why they had to do that. The album might have been a little focused a little bit more of where yeah, of his legacy in hip hop at up until that point. But yeah, check it out after you hear the first album for sure. I'm with you on that.
Right. So that's pretty much it, man. Once again, we thank you guys for tuning in. If you like our content, you can hit subscribe in YouTube, and you can hit subscribe and follow us wherever you get your podcasts.
Click
And
that.
so please give us a like, If you dig this, and if you want to hear any more album retrospectives, or you have any thoughts about our content and you want us to review or do a retrospective on anything else, drop us a comment. So once again, thank you very much.
You know what it is, Rap Geeks in this bitch. Once again, it is Aaron.
It's Sean.
Thank you for listening. Playback, playback, playback.